If there's a gun that deserves the title of the Kalashnikov of guns, that is obviously the Glock. Welcome to a new video. As always, I'm Vlad Spara and I know things. And you know, the Glock is not a particularly interesting gun for me, maybe because I don't particularly love using it. I have some issues with this gun, so I personally think that others are better for me. But anyway, I've had a lot of requests from comments to cover more modern and in general more widespread things. The Glock is probably the 3/8 of an inch, not just 3/8 of an inch, but in general perhaps the most widespread semi-automatic pistol on the planet right now. In 2007, 5 million had been produced. This was 13 years ago, so we're definitely on another figure like that. So we're talking about tens of millions of Glocks produced by now. I also want to tell you the story of the Glock, because this is not just any Glock, it's a first-generation Glock. It's quite difficult to find the first Glocks that came out of the Austrian factories in the 80s now. The story of the Glock is quite interesting because Mr. Glock was an entrepreneur whose initial job was actually to produce curtain fittings. But another thing he did, producing and having the ability to work metals and other materials, was patenting. Experimenting with new materials, polymers in particular, but also light metal alloys. In the 70s, the Austrian army had a competition for a new bayonet designed for the Steyr AUG. The bayonet wasn't very useful in the 70s and onwards, but a new bayonet was still needed. Glock, with his knowledge of materials, decided to enter this competition by presenting his bayonet, which he won because it was a great bayonet of excellent quality, light, that used both steel and polymers, and simply light because it was good. In addition to the bayonet, Glock also won a competition for a military shovel, one of those folding shovels, and from there a certain cooperation began. The Glock factory with the army. But Glock still had no experience with the construction of firearms. While visiting in 1980 the Austrian Ministry of Defense, he overheard a conversation between two officers discussing the future. Competition for a new military pistol, which was supposed to replace the P38. Also, the P38 is on the channel. If you want to go see what the Glock replaced, here's spoiler, the Glock won the competition. Glock, who knew the materials very well, but not the construction of pistols. He assembled a vast team of engineers who worked for him, and with his experience in materials, they created what was the first true polymer pistol. Initially, the Glock didn't have a positive fin. Why are we in 81 when it was adopted? Even though it beat the competition in all the tests, it beats the Heckler and Coke P7, it beats the Beretta 92S, not yet full size, it beats the SIG 226. It meets all the requirements set by the Austrian army. It's safe if dropped from 2 meters. It has a large magazine. It doesn't have a manual safety, which made some people's hair stand on end. In reality, it has 3 different automatic safeties inside, so it's actually a very safe weapon to operate. It's a simple action, Browning. But its revolutionary feature was first and foremost the safety, which is a really safe gun and also simple in its components. Despite its simplicity, it's safe. Moreover, it makes use of these materials, so it's much lighter. It was much lighter than any other gun of the same class at that time. The Glock was revolutionary in this, and the Glock has opened a crazy market. It's an arms race, and to polymer guns, all these polymer guns, all these modern guns that are so widespread today, owe it all to Glock. Because from the Glock, from the acceptance, from the use of the Austrian army, it starts there. Then of course the Glock spreads like wildfire, particularly in many police departments in the United States. Many departments at that time were still using revolvers, so they made a huge technological leap forward, moving from revolvers to a semi-automatic Glock. I've had to deal with it personally several times, with ultra 50-year-old shooters, gun owners who still don't trust the Glock, because it's a stupid piece of plastic. Real guns are made of metal, so many experienced shooters at the time despised it in some ways. Also because as proof of idiocy, there's Murphy's Law that says you do something that even an idiot can use and only an idiot will want to use it. The Glock is certainly very simple to use. Having no external safeties, you literally point the gun and pull the trigger. There's already a safety on the trigger, then there are two other internal safeties. So there's no risk of the gun going off and firing, even if it should fall to the fool of the moment. Because for police and armies, it's very important to train people to use a weapon at the lowest possible cost. And I repeat, this is a weapon that you take, aim, and it literally fires. There's no safety to remove or anything like that. Let me move the camera and let's take a close look at all the features of the Glock. The Glock, of course, is a semi-automatic pistol that makes great use of polymer components. The first Glock model produced is the Glock 17 shown here in 9mm in Parabellum. There are many other models. One of the most widespread is the Glock 19, a more compact Glock. And in many other calibers. We have in a typical position, remember that this in many ways replicates Browning mechanisms we have, typical for pistols of this type. The release of the 18-string magazine charger. The only other commands we have are first of all the hold open lever, which keeps the weapon open when the shots in the magazine are finished. Already here we see how the barrel swinging down reveals the operation of this weapon. This is a short recoil operated weapon with Browning type closure. With the barrel that swings it goes to engage in the trolley. If you don't know what a closure method or an operation method is, go and watch my Guns 101 videos where this thing is perfectly explained. Obviously, releasing the button, the trolley closes, and at this moment the striker is armed. We also have these little levers that allow us to disassemble the weapon. First of all, to disassemble the weapon, you need to disarm the striker. In a nutshell, you need to make a blank shot. Now, by slightly retracting the slide, I try to do it on the camera, by slightly retracting the slide, I can press down these tabs and send the weapon forward. It disassembles into two groups. First, I have a lower group with the trigger group and guys. This part is insanely light, I swear, it's very light. It will be 150 grams maximum, really very little, because all of this is all polymer with some elements in aluminum. In particular, a metallic element that immediately stands out to us is this one here. This is the guide ramp. It's a ramp that is inclined here, which makes the barrel rise and lower. When the weapon cycles, the two levers we saw simply lower this block inside the weapon, which prevents the slide from coming out. Inside. Anyone who owns a Glock will start to notice the differences. The first glaring difference for someone who owns a Glock, for example, of the third generation, is the spring. It's the position of the spring, but we can remove it. By removing it, we can also remove the barrel. And this barrel will remind us of many other swinging block guns that we have already seen, old and new. Now, when it's in firing position, the barrel is in this position. When it fires, it's under the effect of the shot. The weapon recoils. The barrel meets this oscillated surface, which, as you can see, makes it do a small movement. Just enough to lower itself and release the slide. We can see this movement a little better. This when the barrel is closed. When the weapon recoils, the barrel is free to lower itself. In this way, by detaching itself from the slide that obviously contains the bolt inside, we still notice the extractor and the sighting devices, the rear sight and the front sight, to reassemble it. It's all obviously very simple because I just go to reinsert the barrel, reinsert my recoil spring. Here it is. Then we just need to put the slide back on. And the weapon is literally ready for use again. Simple. No, did you think it was over? No, because this is a third generation Glock. I have the opportunity to have more generation Glocks. Unfortunately, I'm missing two. Where the fifth spoiler, I showed you the first. I'm missing the second or a third, and then we'll see a fifth skipping the fourth. Sorry, I don't have it available right now. The third generation Glock, perhaps the most widespread Glock ever, because it was one of the models that was produced the most and for the longest time. The fourth generation, and especially the fifth was introduced just a few years ago, in 2017 if I'm not mistaken, while the fourth generation had some problems. So many people prefer to stay. To still buy today those many used third generation ones that are in circulation. What are the main differences? Well, on the outside we particularly notice two. First of all, in front we have a rail for mounting accessories such as a torch or a laser. Also, the grip has changed because now these bumps are quite noticeable. For the fingers, in fact, the grip of the first generation Glock is a bit less stable. This one, with clearly the shapes of the fingers, is much safer, is much better, and also much easier to stay. A person to hold the gun correctly, because the track, the same specifically tells you where you have to put the little one. Don't mind the red tape. A thing of the range, the guns that are used here regularly to shoot are marked with a red button. For a series of reasons, we can now proceed to disassembly as before. Lower the levers by slightly pulling back the trolley. We still have the spring, the typical recovery spring. Internally, as you can see, it's practically identical. They are not interchangeable, but don't think they are interchangeable because there are small differences in tolerances, in dimensions between the various slides. You can't put a Generation 1 slide on a gun of Generation 3. Even internally, here, the trigger group, very light, is practically identical to what we have seen before. What changes, for example, is the material of the release lever here. Small differences that optimize production and optimize the gun itself. We could probably say here, if you ever shoot a Glock, it will be a third generation Glock, obviously to reassemble it. Same old rigmarole, this oil wedge, because it is regularly used here at the range. Perfect, right? And as promised, here is the 5th generation Glock. The 5th and 4th generation had introduced some changes that are quite evident. First of all, as you can see, the 5th generation does less of that evolution that the 3rd generation had. With the grip, with the shape of the fingers, here the texture, we could say the material, is very rough. So even here the grip is very, very solid. I can easily adjust the size of the grip on the Glock to better fit my hand. Furthermore, you can very easily reverse the magazine release button, which is also a bit larger, to make it completely ambidextrous. The slide release is also ambidextrous. While before I only had it on the left side. Now even left-handers can easily operate the weapon. Another internal improvement that is made to the Glock, because one of the biggest criticisms is the Glock, and that it has a pretty hard trigger. I will tell you, a pretty hard trigger, because the trigger actually activates 3 different safeties and also arms for part of the run. The firing pin is a launched firing pin, the so-called striker. And here the mechanism is a bit improved, so the 5th generation trigger is significantly more gentle. Not so much lighter, but much more pleasant, more gradual in its motion. Another characteristic, quite evident, is that the 5th generation Glock rounds off the design a bit. Especially this, the muzzle is much rounder compared to the very square pistols that came before. Obviously, we still have the slide that we've already seen on the 3rd generation. To disassemble it, as always, slightly retract the slide. In this way, the slide is released to me. And here we already start to see the differences, because the spring is no longer single, but a double concentric spring. And this double spring should help with recoil management and make shooting in general more enjoyable. And the most reliable weapon. So this is one of the big differences that the 5th generation Glock has compared to the previous ones. Otherwise, as always, it's quite similar. The barrel is always removed in the same way. Also, here we have some slightly different features. For example, this element here, that is nothing else, is one of the automatic safeties. In a nutshell, if this is not depressed and this is depressed by the trigger, the firing pin cannot go forward. Apart from that, the construction is quite standard and similar to those we have already seen here internally. Quite a few differences. This generation difference is small gradual improvements. Not all weapons make all this difference on what generation they are, etc. access. Another small thing that has changed, before I had to slide the entire sled from the beginning. Now I can take it and put it at this height and the weapon is ready to be reassembled. And it works as it should. Great, isn't it? Foolproof, as we said. What can I say? I'm not a big fan, but as you've probably gathered from the channel's direction, I give it a try whenever possible. Why? Why not do it? Because shooting, even with the ugliest weapons, is always fun. The weapon is unloaded. Yes, it is. For those who always ask me, this is my wide 25-meter group, however, well, better than nothing. We will say the distance is quite long for such a weapon. I don't know why the holes are so big. It doesn't matter. Well then, the Glock is the Glock. It's idiot-proof. I'm not crazy about it for two reasons, essentially. The first reason is that the trigger is perhaps not the best. I'm a bit more used to other triggers. So I'm still not convinced, but many people like it. I'm just not one of those people. I'm not saying it's a bad gun. The Glock is a great gun. The second thing is that the Glock is quite heavy in the front. And as you empty the magazine, you can feel this imbalance. The bottom part, made of polymer, is very light. What balances the gun is essentially the full magazine. And once it becomes empty, the gun obviously starts to be unbalanced at the front. So having a light gun is often an advantage if it's about carrying it around all the time, but it can be a disadvantage. If it's important, for example, a certain consistency in the shots, in the sensations, sometimes for various types of competitions. They purposely prefer heavier guns because heavier guns first make the recoil feel less. Second, as the magazine empties, they become less unbalanced. Simply since most of the weight of the Glock is in the back, which is the magazine, when it's empty, it's very light and therefore tends to unbalance quite evidently to the front. And I have the impression that it does this more than other modern semi-automatic polymer pistols. I don't know, it could be its construction and how the weight is distributed in the weapon. Anyway, thanks to everyone for watching this video. I think it turned out a bit long, but I hope I was able to explain as best as I could. A bit, the history of the Glock, its models, and how to shoot it. And I repeat, if you ever get a Glock in your hands one day, it's such a stupid thing to take, aim, and shoot. Because it was designed for mass use. That's why the Glock is the Kalashnikov of pistols. As always, I'm Vlad, I shoot and I know things.